So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mistry, who's a security strategist with Trend Micro. And he's going to kick off the day on GDPR. I'm going to explain how really to get started and how by working with Trend Micro and AWS can help address some of the key issues that are coming down the track with GDPR. And it's a topic that is very, very close to all of our hearts here in the room. So I'll hand you over to Bharat. We're going to take questions at the end. We have about 50 minutes, but if anybody wants to clarify anything or have a clarification question, feel free to interrupt and I'll pass the mic around to everybody. Okay? Thank you very much, and looking forward to a productive day and a productive session this morning.
Thank you, Noel. Morning, everyone. I'm Bharat Mistry, as Noel said. I work in the UK predominantly, but I tend to work with a lot of enterprise and public sector customers talking about cloud strategies. And today we're going to really talk about GDPR, not in a great deal, but really in reference to the cloud and what you can do and how you can get started. So, as you all know, data centers have evolved at a phenomenal rate over the last few years. Certainly, technological innovations in virtualization and cloud has meant that we've seen an exponential increase in cloud applications and infrastructures. When I talk to customers, I've seen a subtle change in direction. I remember a few years ago, people used to say, oh, what can we put in the cloud? Now, there's a slight change on that. It's what can't we put in the cloud? So you can see everyone is adopting this kind of cloud-first strategy and wanting to know if you can't put it in the cloud, why not? And when you look at the benefits that the cloud brings, well, why wouldn't you? You know, you've got 24/7 availability, you've got low-cost adoption, you've got faster speed or accelerated speed of accessing new technologies, right? And the numbers speak for themselves. If you look at IDC, they're kind of saying 160 billion this year, and 24 billion just in Western Europe alone. So it makes sense, right? So if you do go to the cloud, happy days, right? We've kind of done all the cool things, and there's still some perception that we don't need to worry, right? And that we don't need to worry goes all the way up. Okay, it's fine thinking about the physical data centers and things like that. But what about your applications, and what about the data itself? What about safeguarding that? And like I said, previously people have thought, oh yeah, we're just going to offload everything to our cloud service provider, AWS in this case. But is that the case? And so really, the cloud service providers, people like Amazon and everyone, they talk about something called shared responsibility. And what does shared responsibility actually mean? And how does it actually differ with the type of cloud that you might be engaging in? Or how does it actually differ when you've got a hybrid setup, right? To give you that kind of baseline idea of what it does actually look like, I've got a simple chart here, so I'll just quickly pop over this way. So you can see on the left-hand side here, if you're going to do everything DIY, so on-premise, you're actually responsible for everything, right? You're responsible for the infrastructure, the hypervisor, the middle layer, the applications, and the data. If you're taking that initial kind of dip into the cloud, you might look at infrastructure as a service, which is what most people tend to go for, those EC2 type workloads. And you can see, in this instance, Amazon will take care of the infrastructure, the kind of hypervisor and the OS. And then as you kind of turn up the level, as you go to platform as a service, if you're looking at things like RDS as a service for your databases, you can see Amazon are taking more responsibility for it. And then finally, when you go software as a service, you've kind of shelved everything into the cloud. But what you will see, and what remains consistent over this whole model, is that you are responsible for the data, not the cloud service provider, right? It's your responsibility. And you see that remains consistent. And in that kind of hybrid setup, you can see what the commonality and the touch points are. So when you're looking at compliance and regulation, you need to take this kind of model into account to understand where are your areas of demarcation and what do you need to kind of put in place. And that kind of leads on to compliance and regulation. Over the last few years, there's been a lot of debate about can you put regulated data in the cloud. Previously, it was all about financial data, about complying to things like PCI DSS. More so over the last 18 months to 2 years, it's been about personally identifiable data, PII data. And the thing is, can you still put that data in the cloud and still be compliant to the regulations? And I suppose the long and short of it is yes, absolutely, right? But what you need to put in place are the kind of compensating controls and mitigating processes to ensure the safety of that data or the protection of that data. I suppose, thinking about the compliance and regulations that are out there, the biggest challenge really is interpretation, right? Interpretation not only for you as cloud users, but also for your kind of certification bodies. You know, for people that were doing PCI DSS a few years ago, it was your auditors. They're needing to know kind of what are you implementing, how are you doing it, what evidential proof have you got that you've implemented some of these things. For GDPR, it's even more convoluted, right? We'll go on to that in a second. But how do you begin? Where do you start? What do the legal clauses mean? And so you've got to think about some kind of approach to this, at least a logical or a systematic approach as to compliance and regs. Just very quickly on GDPR, I'm not going to go into the finer details of it, but from a top-level viewpoint, it's effective 25th of May. So you haven't got long, really. We're talking probably 4 weeks to at least get yourself on your compliance program. It's there really to design. Well, it's designed to harmonise EU data protection laws across the EU member states and the protection of that kind of personally identifiable data for EU citizens. Right? Here we can see the kind of 4 key pillars. It really focuses on things like the protection of personal data. It's that kind of resistance to malicious attacks and hacks, the evaluation of that data risk as well, and then finally it talks about things like the protection or privacy by design at its core. And that's fine, right, as a top-level thing. But actually, how do you go about complying? If you look at the GDPR kind of specification, it's very woolly in its language, right? Everything's been written in terms of legal terms and not technological terms. So you've got no prescriptive guidance as to what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And what it kind of leads to is you need to take into account some kind of framework-based approach. Certainly, GDPR doesn't have a framework, so you need to look at some kind of framework. A framework that looks at privacy, that looks at risk management, and then also the controls framework as well, and giving you some prescriptive guidance. And there are many frameworks out there that you can pick. So you could do ISO if you want to. So ISO 27001, which is a pretty good standard. The thing is, there's no prescriptive guidance as to what you need to do. You can look at 27002 as your best practice guide, but it doesn't go all the way. So kind of taking a step back, what we decided to do was really look at the NIST framework, right? So the NIST framework is a multi-tiered risk management and controls framework. It was developed by the US federal government. And really, it's there to give you that top-down approach. The fact that it was done by the US Gov also has got some pedigree to it as well. Certainly, it's not going to give you all the ticks in boxes that you need for GDPR compliance, but it's certainly going to give you a good baseline to start from. Right? The particular specification or the appendix that we're going to be looking at is the 800-53. And we're looking at not the most current rev. The current rev is at version 5 going through approval. But we're going to be looking at the version 4, which has been out for a little while. And what we're going to be looking at is the kind of controls. If you look at the framework itself, those technical controls, they're split into effectively low, medium, and high. And they come out into kind of 18 families, as we can see across here. And we can see we've got the elements that we need. We've got the risk management in there, we've got the awareness and training in there, we've got incident response in there. But the ones that we're going to look for, certainly from a technical controls point of view, are the high sec or the high impact controls that are highlighted in red here. These are the ones that you should be looking in that shared model to work out, okay, these are the things that we need, how are we going to implement them? So, going back to that shared responsibility model that I spoke about earlier, right? When you see this marketing slide, it looks really easy, right? People are saying, you know, AWS and everyone will say, you're responsible for this bottom bit. I mean, AWS is responsible for this bottom bit, and you're responsible for the top bit, right? Fantastic, job done. But the practicality is completely different. Certainly when I've been speaking to customers, there are several questions that arise, right? So first and foremost, I think if you look currently in the AWS catalog, I think there are in excess of 500 security capabilities, right? 500. So the first question is, which ones do I use out of that 500? Which ones are going to be applicable for my use case or to meet my GDPR compliance? And which ones are actually going to protect the applications and the data that I'm going to host? Right? Now, a lot of this information is embedded in the multitude of white papers that you'll see, not only from AWS, but also from people like Trend Micro. And so you've got to think of a way of, well, how do we take all of this and put it into something a bit more realistic? And how do I take a consistent model around it? So I'd say probably about 18 months ago, Trend Micro worked jointly with AWS architects to come up with a best practices template. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at something called a QuickStart template that takes the best practices not only in the AWS platform, but also in the Trend Micro Deep Security platform, and puts it in a automated CloudFormation template, which generates a platform for you, which is based on multi-tier, multi-application, multi-VPC. Right? The idea to give you here really is a baseline platform that you can take, adopt, and change for your environments. So, what is the template called of the QuickStart? The QuickStart is the enterprise accelerator for NIST. Like I said, it was done about 18 months ago. So, how do you actually launch the QuickStart? You basically go to the web page, pick the QuickStart that you want, and away you go. It is really, really easy, as we've seen here. Right? You just put in some very basic parameters. And these parameters are things like your AWS key, the region where you want to deploy, and some basic credentials for deep security. Right? We just go down the stack, accept the EULA, and away you go. That script runs in about an hour to build up a best practices reference architecture. And I'll go into a bit later on what that architecture looks like. So, going back to that shared services model, let's look at, first of all, those foundation layer services and what you need to bring into play first. So, this should be no surprise to you guys, right? IAM is a basic service for AWS. In fact, it's one of the principal services that you should be using, right? And what we've done in the QuickStart is we have looked at best practices around things like the roles, the permissions, and the definitions, and we've embedded them automatically in there. What IAM does, it manages, it says user access on there, but it's also API access as well. Any way you can touch your AWS subscription or account, IAM is the facility to do it. And what we're looking for is for a consistent set of permissions, control, and access levels that touch the account. And you can see on the right-hand side there, which are the control families we're ticking off, right? Access control, audit accountability, config management, going all the way down, right? GDPR doesn't talk about it, but these are the things that you need to start taking into account in terms of access and control. You'll notice that we've got that kind of box at the bottom saying create complete. These services, as we'll see in the next little clip, show you the progress of being in progress and completion. And they form part of your documentation stack, right? We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. The second critical service to have is CloudTrail. So CloudTrail is a fundamental security pillar for AWS, right? This is your audit infrastructure. It's this service that's going to give you your governance, your compliance, and your operational risk, right? CloudTrail is there to log all the activities that are going on in your account. It's not turned on by default, and so as part of this template that we have, we turn it on. Yeah. We also create a repository. So that, for those of you who don't know, the S3 bucket is our repository. And what we're doing in there is we're holding versioning information as things are happening. So you've got a full audit trail as to what's gone on, right? And then you can do retention policies on the back of your S3 bucket as well, moving out to Glacier if you want to. But what we're trying to do here is capture all the events, whether it's a user on the GUI, whether it's an API call, or whether it's a CLI call. We want to capture all of that information. And you can see we can start ticking the boxes for things like config management and audit and accountability. Here we can see that second video taking place. And you can see we've got create in progress, and you can see exactly what we're creating, right? What we're trying to do here is to automate the steps in a consistent manner. I can guarantee you, right, if you wrote something down in a specification and gave it to two different people, they're going to implement it in two different ways. What we're looking for here is a repeatable, auditable, consistent deployment of services, right? Moving on from CloudTrail, we're looking to use services like CloudWatch and the simple notification services. Again, absolutely two fundamental services for security. Your CloudWatch is your monitoring service, right? It's there to kind of watch for threshold violation. It's there to kind of look for changes, capture changes in whatever way, and then send something off to do something with it, right? In this case, what we're doing is we're setting some metrics in play to watch, and we're setting some violation levels. Once we see them, we send off, or we write to an SNS topic. That SNS topic can then be used to then kind of do your instant response. So you can see it's a lever to kick off a process. And it could be a page alert, it could be an email, but more importantly, it could be a message in a queue that does an automated process for incident response or to do something else with. Again, on the right-hand side, we can see what control families we're kind of ticking the boxes in, predominantly access control and config management. And that's what you really want in some of these cases, right? You're looking for changes in the configuration. If you look at any kind of hack that's occurred, it involves some kind of config change. Whether it's a binary or a file that's landed on a machine, or whether it's an exploit in an application that's caused something to change, that's what we're looking for. And then the next piece is that kind of secure baseline infrastructure. You know, the virtual private cloud, using network access control lists and using those security groups, right? These are the ABCs of that secure, compliant infrastructure, right? And what I've said before, it's about that programmatic delivery of the network infrastructure. You want it to be consistent. You might deploy it in, let's say, in the UK region for today. You may want to do test and dev in another region. You may want to set up another deployment of that somewhere else, right? And you need it to be consistent. And again, what we're now seeing is the completion of that first part. So those baseline services are now kind of finishing through. And you can see everything changes from yellow to green in terms of what we're completing. And you can see this output, by the way, is a brilliant tool. You can take this output, and you can use this as your evidential proof of what you've done or what you've deployed. So that question of, you know, an auditor saying, okay, you've got these best practices, you've got all these services, you've configured something. How do we know what you've configured maps back to the control families that we talked about in your regulations and compliance? It's using that output that we showed in that last kind of video that can help you do it. So what we've done is we've set that kind of the cloud service provider piece just in those few simple steps in that CloudFormation template. As you start going up the stack, you need to think about actual workload protection. And that workload protection kind of manifests itself in a number of different ways. So you've got to think about attacks that occur at that workload level from a network side and from within the host itself. You have a number of different options here, but we think deep security is probably going to be one of the better ones on the market to help you do this. The reason why, as you'll see, the controls that we offer kind of span a range of different things. But what we're looking to do here is to give you or help you above the line in terms of what are we going to do to protect the data and the applications. So what does deep security actually look like? Deep security, don't think of it as a product. It really is a server security platform. Right? It's a server security platform that has a number of composite controls that work together. One thing that gets mentioned in GDPR time and time again, well, there's three things that come out of it, actually. The most common one is state-of-the-art technology. Right? But what do they mean by state-of-the-art? Right? The specification was deliberately written in a way that it would be ongoing, evergreening, right, without having to revisit it multiple times. So what could be state-of-the-art today might not be state-of-the-art tomorrow. If you look at these controls, what we've got is a set of cross-generational controls that work hand in hand. If you look at some of the base controls that you've probably seen before, so you'll see things like anti-malware and content filtering. Yeah, they've been there for a while. But then you're coupling them with things like machine learning, heuristics, behavioral analysis, sandbox analysis. These are some of the new age controls you need to think about, especially as the threat landscape is changing. Right? We've all seen the kind of recent ransomware attacks and things like that. They've either been a form of a zero-day, or it's been a violation of vulnerability that hasn't been seen before. Right? So you need the capability that not only says I've got some prevent capability, which is what our kind of anti-malware and content filtering would be, but you need that detection capability to say, actually, we've seen something outside the norm. It's never been seen before, but it's doing some strange things. The other thing that the specification talks about is having the appropriate controls for the type of asset or the data you're managing. So that automatically says I need to take a risk-based control, but a risk-based approach, but the controls that I adopt doesn't have to be all of that. If it's a low-value server, again, it might have some PII data on there. You may only want to use some of those controls, especially if it's embedded quite further down. But if it's an internet-facing server or an application, you may want to use all of those elements in there. The key thing I want to say here is that you can switch in and switch out these controls at will. The other thing, it integrates seamlessly into the platform. So you can embed it into your gold image, or you can have it deployed through one of your DevOps tools, something like Chef or Puppet. And it's available through the marketplace as well. And here we can see the back end of that formation script kicking off. And what we're doing here is we're spinning up the deep security infrastructure as part of that overall reference architecture. So, continuing with that theme, how do we leverage the deep security controls for NIST and really, I suppose, GDPR? First and foremost, it's about visibility, right? Knowing where your workloads are. And if you're born in the cloud company, that's fairly straightforward, right? You can use your AWS console and you can tag the APIs and you can see where your workloads are. The reality is you're going to have something on-premise as well. You're going to have a hybrid mix. The deep security platform will connect not only into your legacy estate, but will also tap into your virtual estate on-premise, so a private cloud, and also into public cloud services as well. So what you've got all of a sudden is a central repository showing all your workloads. And you're getting information about those workloads as well. So the IP address that's associated with it, the operating system that it's running on. If you're using tag information, we'll see the tags that are coming through as well. Just on the AWS platform, if you are multi-region, cross-subscription, we can see that as well. And really, this central console is your main operational dashboard. Right? This is where you're going to be able to see the alerts coming through. This is where you're going to see some audit and accountability information. This is where you're going to start doing some system integrity monitoring within the workload. Not on the AWS platform, but within the workload. So quickly going back to those controls, we talked about, well, we categorize them in kind of two ways. We've got these file-based controls, and we've got network-based controls. And the file-based controls are anti-malware, I've already talked about, but integrity monitoring, right? Very fundamental control. Going back to what I said earlier about if someone's going to attack a workload, what are they going to be doing? Most likely, they're either going to be changing a file, or they're going to be stopping or starting a service, opening and closing a port, or more importantly, they're going to be dropping a new kind of file or a malicious weaponized document onto a workload. Integrity monitoring is going to do that for me. Right? I can see file change, I can see directories, I can see files being deleted or created, I can see registry changes, I can see services being shut and closed. We've got something called log inspection on there. Again, we get a raft of information from all of these sources, especially on the workload itself. And if you've seen something like, let's say, a credential stuffing attack, right? So someone's done, let's say, 100 failed logins. And if you see that in the space of 2 seconds, you know this is an attack. What you're going to see in your syslog or your higher-level management system is like hundreds of alerts. How do you sift through that? What log inspection will do is give you an element of pre-correlation. And actually, it's clever enough to say in this time span, we saw over 100 attempts. And what we're going to do is we're just going to send one alert out to your platform to respond to. And then application control. It's there to kind of lock down those workloads. Keep it tight. I've got a gold image. I don't want anyone to tamper with it. It can only be changed through my change control with a nominated update source, but anything else can't do it. Application control will give you. Now, it'll also give you an inventory of what's installed as well. Network controls, right? So we also have a firewall, and we also have an intrusion prevention unit on there as well. The firewall, you say, well, why do you need a firewall? You don't have to use it, but it's there to complement the platform, AWS platform services with security groups. What I mean by that is, let's say you've got a compromised machine. Rather than going in and changing those security groups on the fly, you could use our firewall and do host isolation just for that one machine at a finger of, just by doing one click push and you're done. Isolate, do the remediation, and then bring it back in again without having to change your security groups. That's what it's there for. The intrusion prevention capability, that's where the smarts really start to kick in. Because now we're starting to give you some visibility, really, from layer 4 up to layer 7. So one of the clever things that we do, when you do intrusion prevention, typically, what you'd have to do is do some kind of scan of that machine and work out, well, what are the holes we need to fill. You then need to manually derive that policy, test it, and then push. And that's fine if you've got a few applications, but when you've got hundreds, how do you do that? You're just going to burn FTE cycles into doing that. Well, with our capability on that, we can automate that process. So we look at the operating system, we look at the service packs, we look at the applications, and then we compare that with our kind of threat intelligence that we have in our cloud. And we look to see what's missing. And if you choose to do so, we can do an automatic policy push. When you do then patch that workload, those rules will fall away until you do a subsequent scan, and as more vulnerabilities arise. And what you get is a roving, context-aware profile. So if your workload does change over time, your posture will change over time. And this goes back to that security being appropriate for that instant in time. So that IPS engine also can be used to give you your risk view or your exposure view to that workload as well. Yeah. We've seen customers kind of do a regular scan of their workloads, and they can see what it's open to at that instant in time. And what we provide is virtual patching capability. We've had instances in the past, Apache struts, for example. We had a protection within 4 hours of the vulnerability being disclosed. Same with Heartbeat and Shell Shock. And because we're not touching the OS or the application, you don't have to necessarily go through the full change control cycle. And what we're doing is virtual patching. And here we can see the last bits of that CloudFormation template going through. So what you're going to see here is actually, if you look at the scrolling bar at the bottom, is the output. And the cool thing here is that you'll see a URL being shown in that output. And what that URL is going to do is it's going to take you to the landing page for deep security. There we go. We put some credentials in. And on that last screen, you saw all the workloads. You saw the statuses against them. And here we can see the policy panel for it. Yeah? You can see what anti-malware capability I've got turned on, what web reputation policy I have, what firewall rules have I got associated with that policy, what intrusion prevention, integrity monitoring. The key thing here is you can have a catalog of policies. So if you've got similar workloads that are dotted around all over the place, you define the policy once, and then you push them out. They could be cross-region, they could be cross-subscription. We don't mind. We can capture all of that. And here you can see some of the rules for integrity as well. So, how do you go out automating with CloudFormation, or why? The reason that it's done in a CloudFormation template is, well, it's a key service for AWS. But more importantly, it's infrastructure as code. Right? It's repeatable, it's auditable, it's your documentation that I talked about. If you've done something you need to troubleshoot, look in your More importantly, you've got automatic version control. If you're putting these templates into a GitHub repo, for example, you can do version controlling. What you're aiming to do here, or what this can help you do, is create an immutable infrastructure, whereby you don't have to patch each month. You just break it down and you redeploy. The other thing is, if you do find an issue and you do need to fix something, you change it once, and once only in the template, and you redeploy. Going back to that scenario that I said earlier, if you give 2 different people the same kind of broad specification, they're going to implement it in different ways. It's not going to be consistent, and it might not be auditable. The other thing is, as we've seen, deep security is a key part in that CloudFormation template. So even though I'm talking about deep security, if you've got other tools, you may have strategic partnerships with other vendors. You've got to try and get them to play in this space, right? If they don't work with CloudFormation, they're not good for your public cloud environment, I would say. So what have we talked about? We've talked about these high-level controls. We've talked about a broad baseline kind of design philosophy. We've looked at the kind of the controls that are in the 800-53. And what we're kind of looking to do, really, is to have it in a plug-and-play architecture, which is what we're going to go to next. Oh, just before we go on to that, here you can see the other templates that are available. And you'll notice, right, that you could take deep security on its own as a template and just run that if you want to. Yeah. All we've done in the Enterprise Accelerator is take the one above and the one below and combine it together. What does the template actually give you in terms of coverage? Right? Here you can see that model. So anything on the far left is inherited, in the middle is shared, and the black part is what's responsible for the customer. And you can see, if you look at those NIST controls up there, if you look at things like maintenance, it's very much an inherited and shared control. Right? It's inherited from AWS, and your responsibility is only at the top end. If you look at something like incident response, it's very much at the other end. Yeah? And rightly so, because it's your incident response process, not AWS's. You have to work with them if it's a cloud-related issue, but it's predominantly your control. So, what's one of the value adds that really comes out of it? When you look at the NIST framework itself, there are over 200 controls, and what we've done is we've reviewed all the high-impact controls, and we've come up with this security matrix. And what we've done is effectively broken it down in terms of the family, the subpart, who it's addressed by, whether it's AWS or Trend Micro, right? Whether, what category it affects, so whether it's an information system or a network infrastructure piece, and then what the responsibility is, whether it's a shared or inherited. But most importantly is these 2 artifacts here. What is it that AWS is going to do, and what is it that Trend Micro is going to do? And this is available. You can download this right now, and you can go through this. Right? The formation template itself is all based on reusable code, based on a plug-and-play architecture. We've done it in terms of stacks. So you've got the access stack, network stack, security, data server, and deep security. And you can see the components that we build in and out. Each of these stacks you can change, or you can take out, depending on what's applicable for your environment. What we've tried to do here is to give you some base groundwork to kind of leverage and take. Certainly for day one, this will help you a lot. That reference architecture I talked about, this is what it looks like. When you spin up that QuickStart template, this is what you get. So you've got your kind of archiving bucket, you've got your management VPC, you've got your production, and you've got your dev. And you've got the kind of config rules, CloudTrail and CloudWatch. As you can see in there, the DSM acronym in there is Deep Security Manager. So it's that shield is Trend Micro. And you can see how it can fit across those regions, right? That might not be right for you. You might have something completely different. But you should be able to take the individual scripts that are embedded in the template, either use them directly or modify them directly. Right? That's the URL. All that information is on that URL. So the QuickStart template, the best practice guide, and everything that goes with it. So, in summary, what is happening? Right? GDPR is coming, like it or not, 25th of May. Whether you're ready or not, you need to think about where do you start from. The specification is very woolly in its kind of language that it uses. It's based on legal terms, nothing technological. So you need a framework-based approach. Whether you go down the ISO route or NIST or whichever one, you need to have a good framework to base it on. What we've done here is taken the NIST framework, going back to the reasons why I said earlier. It gives you the elements of privacy, risk management, and controls. It's got some prescriptive guidance on how you should be doing things. The fact that it's done from the US Gov also has some pedigree around it as well. The high impact controls that we're using in the template, you can see what they are, predominantly around access control, audit accountability, identification, and authentication, and really around system and integrity. And what we've done really is to give you that kind of, done the kind of heavy lift and shift for you. Certainly so that you can take it and adopt it and use it at will. And that's it really. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Bring back the URL.
Sorry?
URL, bring it back on the screen.
Yeah, this one?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Bharat, for a great introduction to GDPR. As Bharat said, we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. So if anyone wants to kick off, I have an additional mic here, and we can pass it around so that everybody can hear the questions.
No? Okay.
Anyone? Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, this works best in a brand new account where nothing is deployed, or would it also work where you already have your VPC configured with a direct connect or like your own CloudTrail enabled already?
Okay, so the template itself works in a new account, ideally. It's there to kind of show you the best practices. What you can do, you can set this up, and then you can look into the bits that you need and adapt it into your existing environment. That's what it's there for. Okay. There's one more question.
How many services are covered by the reference architecture?
How many, sorry?
How many AWS services are covered
Ooh,
by
I don't know. I need to look into that. If you come and see me on the stand, we can have a quick chat. I'll be there all day today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
So the template starting and putting everything in place. If you want to add some stuff later on, that's also supported.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
That's what the template is designed for. It's think of it like a baseline that you can take and then you adapt and change to your environment. If you find there are things in there that don't work for you, take them away. I mean, for example, in this reference architecture, we use a WordPress application, but you're going to have your own apps, right, that you want to tier on top. The deep security policies that we create, they're just basic ones. Right? So if you're running a particular variant of a web server or something legacy, you're going to have to create some kind of protection rules that map onto them directly, which are in the platform, but they're not enabled directly.
And it's not limited to any size?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you.